träffats i vuxen ålder. Welcome to Safar. And since we usually do this on public transport, but today we are on this fabulous Rätt bus, it's okay, it's a bit more okay to move around. Welcome everyone. Tack så mycket. Hej. Whoa! Yeah, this happens a lot. Okay, should we start? And I always start with reading a letter. So here it comes. Welcome to Safar, everyone. Safar. Moving with dreams, wastelands, and our utopian realities. Safar is a series of performances in public space between activists, thinkers, witches, and artists about anarchy, strategy, possible utopian realities, and the spaces our bodies inhabit. Dreams practiced in wastelands and in gardens of exiles. Outside or parallel or beyond the patriarchal, capitalist, heterosexist, colonial, hegemonic order, there are realities of sisterhood, love, collaboration, care, hope, and community. Sharing influence and not taking power. In solidarity. In Safar, we, the duo Aghili Karlsson, invites companions, co-travelers, Ham Safar. We admire. We ask them to share parts of their lives and their visions in a traveling performative talk, moving from the center of Stockholm to our studio in the rural areas on the edge of the city. A participatory travel where others can join in moving, talking, and sharing a meal. We are so happy, honored, and excited to present Sam Hultin, artist, and Judith Kiros, poet. Welcome to Safar.
Thank you.
And welcome everyone else in this bus and our Ham Safar on the live stream. Today it's also a very special day, of course, since it's the February 6th, the Sami Day, the day we celebrate Sápmi, and today we also stand in solidarity with the protests against the mining in Gallok. Okay, I will go in here now.
So much stuff.
And please let us, yes?
Det blev lite ljust.
Okej.
Men alltså att vi kommer ut.
Ja, vi kommer ut där. Ja. Får du plats här, Nemo?
Ja.
And of course, you will let us know if you can hear. Oh, sorry, Judith.
No problem.
Okay, let me take that one.
I feel like a famous person.
You are. You are.
Reality show.
Yeah.
It's good to be famous and brilliant. No?
Do we just begin?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, we just wanted to say that please interrupt with questions at any point. Yeah, we would really like it to be a conversation between everyone on the bus.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can't hear us, maybe you can make some signal to us so we can raise our voices a bit.
Yes.
And
Also on the live stream, please let us know if you don't hear.
Yeah,
Yes.
exact.
And if you want to ask questions, of
Absolutely.
course. Yeah.
Mm.
Should we start by introducing
Yes.
ourselves a bit?
Yeah,
Maybe like
Absolute.
what we do.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Sam, what do you do?
Well, I work as an artist, and I have worked a lot with inviting queer communities, sometimes my own and sometimes communities in other places, to activate a part of a queer history together with me, or at least that's how I would like it to be. And for the last few years, I worked with an archive that belonged to, or was created by, a trans activist and a lesbian activist, Eva-Lisa Bengtsson, who passed away 4 years ago. And I worked with activating this archive and making it accessible, especially for Stockholm's trans community, but the Swedish trans community. Yeah. And Judith Kiros, who are you?
Well, I'm a poet. I published one poetry collection called O, which is a kind of an engagement with William Shakespeare's play Othello, and kind of like being in a dialogue with the work about issues of race and gender and genre was the idea when I did it, and hopefully that's also what I produced. But yeah, that's kind of what I've done. And yeah, I write a lot, mostly poetry. I do some journalism as well, but that's mostly criticism, and I think maybe we should stick to the art bits, even though I know a lot of critics think that that's also an art. No shade, like totally is. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, if maybe we can also talk about the history writing, but talking about what we also talked about yesterday, and the theme for this about like creating or thinking about utopias or places beyond capitalism. Maybe it's more interesting to talk about your poetry.
Yeah, I think so
right?
too. Yeah.
Do you want to start there? Or do you want to start in history writing?
No, absolutely. We can. Well, maybe no. Actually, maybe start in history writing. I think that there's more to delve into that I can then bring into the poetry stuff. Because you said you were working with an archive. Could you talk a bit about how you did that and why?
Yes. So Eva-Lisa Bengtsson, I met her in 2016 for the first time, and she, after I had met her, or like I met her at a lesbian sing-along that I arranged, which is like a part of my practice, and one important part of my practice is also to try to bring different generations in the queer community to do stuff together, like sing political songs from the 70s and 80s, for example. And we met there, and we started talking, and she said that she wanted to show me something. And when we met, she just told me her life story, which involves, for one thing, starting the first club for trans people in Sweden in 1964, which I had never heard about it.
No, me neither.
Yeah, but also like being super involved with the Stockholm's feminist and lesbian movement, and like doing so much work for the community, but I had never heard this story before. So I nagged her for about a year to let me conduct filmed interviews, which she finally let me do in 2017. And so the thing with her is that besides being this amazing activist, like doing all these, like so much work, she couldn't live as a woman in her daily life. So she had like one straight life and one activist life as a woman. So when she passed away, and this is unfortunately, I mean, still common, especially for older trans people, that there's a legal family that is responsible for taking care of the funeral and so on. And because no one in her like activist life knew her like family, there was no contact. So like how we understood that she passed away was because she hadn't called me in a while, and I had like talked to her friends, and people were of course worried. So I could kind of figure out, because I knew some details about her private life, I could figure out her address, and I went there, and then a neighbor told me that she had passed away. I thought that I would do a short version, but it's such a crazy story. But anyway, after that I started to because I knew that she had this material, this amazing photos from these parties in the 60s, and so much material, and so I started to try to get in touch with her family, and after also 6 months or so I got to take care of this amazing archive, which is 8 moving boxes with this totally unique material that doesn't exist anywhere else. So obviously I have been a bit in love with this archive, or obsessed with it, I don't know. So I've been trying to invite my community to learn about this Eva-Lisa and this story. So I've made these city walks, for example, and we have had these collective readings of some of these letters that were sent to her. And also this fall, in October, I arranged an anniversary, a 57th year anniversary, which maybe we can come back to also, because I'm yes, and it was actually held in the same building where they had these parties in the 60s. And it was so beautiful because it was also in this pause in the pandemic where you could actually meet. And there was this or I hadn't really understood maybe how much I had longed for from my community. So it was a very very I don't know, it felt so important for me, emotionally, to do that together with the community.
For us too.
You were there, yes. And my mother was there.
Very important.
So blah blah blah.
That's
yes.
really interesting.
I know.
But also, what, you said you were obsessed with this archive. What is it specifically? What is it specifically that calls to you?
I think the urgency, some things that happened to Eva-Lisa is so connected to what is happening right now and what has been happening for the last few years in Sweden and in Britain and in Norway and all over the Western world. This backlash against trans people, and you can trace it so much in her history, because you can, for example, she was one of the founders of the Kvinnohuset, the women's house in Stockholm. But during the 90s, when this transphobic book, The Transsexual Empire, came out, it influenced the Swedish feminist movements so much, or at least parts of it, that she was kicked out of the women's house. And I think that it's if you read Kajsa Ekman or one of these so-called feminist writers or debattörer today, it's the exact same words from this book.
Yeah.
So I think it feels also so urgent to talk about, because you can connect it so much to what's happening here.
Yeah. And the intensification of that backlash the past 5 years or so, it gets gradually more intense. But that's really interesting, that you kind of see the same talking points. Because I've been thinking about, obviously a lot of people have pointed it out, but the similarity in rhetoric between what's going on surrounding kind of the trans movement now and what people said/say about gay marriage, for instance. And now they're very much I support gay marriage, but this is taking it too far. And in the past they were I support support gay people, but marriage is taking it too far. And then a little bit further back, it's like, I don't support gay people at all.
Yeah.
Like it's the exact same rhetoric. Like they're corrupting the children. Like children are getting confused. It's very much kind of conservative, reactionary rhetoric, but like couched as feminism.
Yeah.
A lot of the time.
Exact. But also like about like why it's so important to, or why I think it's so important to also talk about these things is because I mean there are also, I mean the right and I mean also like the far right and the racists in our government, they are also using the framgångar, the success of the gay movement, I would say, to create this story about Sweden as this naturally like tolerant country, and making, I mean, building this story about us, the good guys, who are like so equal, and we have the gay marriage, and you know, as opposed to these horrible immigrants, like, or Muslim countries. So I mean, it's also like to refuse that story, also by talking about what kind of activism is behind this so-called success or what.
Yes, how quickly it's co-opted as well. I was thinking about that Försvaret, the ad, which was like for Pride. Do you remember? It was like it was like a soldier with like the pride flag on their cheek or something. And I was like, this is so telling. Being like, you know, oh, we're defending your rights against these kind of others who hate gay people or trans people and so on and so forth. And like that it's such a it's become such an important part of like racist rhetoric, like when the racists arranged like a pride pride walk through Järvafältet. Järva Pride. And I mean, they were like literal Nazis in there, trying to kind of provoke a reaction, which was so, it was so nonsensical and also cynical. Like it's so weirdly enough also kind of successful, that kind of homo-nationalist rhetoric. And I think the reason it's successful is because it occurs like partially in the like extreme right movement and those places like the Nazis, the racists, SD, and so on and so forth. But it's also happening on kind of a state level with Försvaret, with kind of policies, foreign politics, and so on, and how kind of Sweden always sees itself as a progressive force in the world, always one step ahead of everyone else when it comes to human rights. And it's so clearly not the case, particularly now that we're talking on the day when we kind of celebrate or think about Sápmi and the kind of enormous exploitation of that area, and the fact that there's no protection for that particular minority in this country. And also what you said about, because I think what's also interesting about what you said, and I remember we spoke a little bit about this before, is like the idea that history is like always progressing and getting better and better. And so, you know, a lot of people look back like to the 60s and they're like, oh, you know, it sucked for queer people. No one did anything, it was awful. But looking back, there's always been people who have been creating these spaces for others.
Absolute. And I think it goes hand in hand, this idea of Sweden as this super progressive and tolerant country, and this idea of everything getting better and better, like
I find that also so interesting when it comes to racism in Sweden, because it's like it's the idea is it's getting better and better, and it's never been better than this. So how could Sweden possibly be racist? Like, it doesn't make any sense. We don't even have the word race in our laws. Like, how could it? It's impossible to talk about racism as a problem, because the idea is there can't possibly be racism. In that case, in a worst case scenario, maybe there's xenophobia, but that's all to do with fear. And if people just natural fear. Yeah, exactly. The idea, like, human nature is just inherently really scared of black people.
But it's such like an extreme form of gaslighting and like, and I'm also thinking about it in terms of like also taking it back to Eva-Lisa, but like trans people's death and queer, like the gay, especially gay men who died during the HIV and AIDS pandemic, like epidemic, that when they died and when a lot of trans people die, their identity is erased. So it's like, but no, this person that you're talking about didn't die, so therefore there's nothing to be sad about. And it's like with also racism, like what you're saying, like, but we don't have that here, so, or like we have an equality, we have a jämställdhetsplan, like we have this, so it can't possibly, so very much Swedish culture to hide behind these jämställdhetsplaner or
it's very, I remember I said once, like, I was talking to Samuel actually sitting over there, about how being like a black person in Sweden is like being consistently gaslighted from your birth. It's like somebody will call you the N-word and you'll be like, that's racist, and they'll be like, no it isn't, it means black, and we used to say it before. It's like, okay, well it's still racist. It was racist then and it is racist now, and then it's like, oh my god, politically correct culture has gone mad, and it's like, do you even know what that means? You know? And very, like, I was also thinking about like what you said. I don't have TikTok, but occasionally I find TikToks that are weirdly interesting, and it was one that was about like, it was this girl, I can't believe I'm referencing TikTok.
Please do it.
I am 32 years old. But it was this girl who was like, her brother died, and she was like, I went into his phone and deleted all the nudes of his girlfriend before I gave his phone to his family. And like a gay man, American, who had survived the HIV/AIDS epidemic, replied to it and was like, that's actually exactly what we used to do for other people in our community in the 80s and 90s. We would go immediately when we found out somebody had died, we would go to their home, and we knew where everything was, and we would clear everything out, trash it or keep it or use it before the family had access to the house. And that's like a kind of protection, obviously, but when we're thinking about history and erasure and what you're talking about in terms of like, no, I mean, Sweden's just progressive, and back in those days that didn't even exist. It's like, it was deliberately erased. It was deliberately hidden because as a safety measure. Super interesting work, Sam.
Thank you. But like, how do you think about or do you want to say something about history writing connected to your work, or like,
I guess, yeah. I mean, yes, I could try.
If you want.
Because I'm not very like good at history. Like, I don't know that much about history. So the way I engage with history is usually through literature. And obviously that's a very different beast. Like, it doesn't have the same kind of idea of objectivity that history writing has, right? Like, it's a piece of fiction, it's a work of art. So you engage with the kind of discourses that go on in that. But something I have noticed is sometimes when you read particular kinds of novels, and you engage with them and stuff, like you get two kind of reactions. One is like, well, you can't judge it by today's standards. It was written back then, and back then everyone was an idiot, you know? And then the second one is like, oh no, it's so deeply problematic because it was written in like 1690, and like you kind of still get the attitude that going back in time, people were all the same. That's like the attitude usually behind the kind of like, well, if you go back in time, obviously everyone's going to hate women or whatever. As if there were no women writers or no more kind of nuanced discussion about those things because it was like 1690. But also you'll find the bit where it's like going back in time, everyone should have the exact same opinions that people have now. And obviously neither of those are workable if you're working with literature. So for me, at least, engaging with literature means trying to kind of read, understand the work of art in its context, and not necessarily in because it's in the past, but because much like your work, I think, you can see so many traces of what's going on now, then, and you can see so many countercurrents, and you can see so many responses. Like there's an ongoing debate and dialogue in every work of fiction, even if it's from the past, you know? And so when I wrote O...
Yeah, can't you tell a bit about that?
Yeah, okay, yes.
I mean, I have read it, but to the audience and the people.
Yes, yeah, sure. It's basically like a huge Shakespeare nerd, which was unexpected for me as well. Like, but I did a lot of reading and a course in Shakespeare and stuff, and was like completely hooked. Like I always thought it was incredibly interesting and dynamic, and not because I'm like, Shakespeare was a genius. Like I don't believe in the genius myth at all. But what it is I think somewhat kind of the reason I enjoy Shakespeare, I would say, is because with every new performance, somebody engages with the text in a different way. And because Shakespeare it's been practiced for so long, it's performed for so long, there's a history of performance that also says something about the society in which it was performed, right? So it's not like a stale text, like you go in and you read it and you're like, my God, Shakespeare, what was your deal with Othello? It's like you see how it's been staged in his time, 100 years later, 100 years after that, in our time. And so through that, rather than through the text really, you get kind of an insight into the discourses surrounding race and performance, which I found really interesting. So basically what it was I just had like a super depressed year where I watched a lot of Shakespeare, mostly Hamlet, because I was in a bad mood. I was like, damn, he's right. Life has no point. But then I was watching like Othello from '95, which is like so, like it's a very strange, like they've really gone for the kind of like very heavily kind of faux Hollywood Africanized Othello, wearing some kind of leopard fur, you know, that kind of, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, I wonder what people have done, like, with that. Like, what does that say about, like, when it was produced? Because then around, like, the 2000s also, there was, like, a big thing where they did high school versions of every Shakespeare play, and it was amazing.
Isn't there, like a high school version of Othello as well,
yeah,
like a basketball kind of drama going on
with Julia Stiles, that poor girl.
Oh, I don't remember. I just know.
I think she was like every time they needed like a white woman who was like tragically in love with a cool black guy, they'd be like, it's Julia Stiles. Oh, she's great. Save the Last Dance, when she did her weird kind of robot dance. It was really funny.
That
But
is a form of gaslighting, by the way. That dance she did, and we were fooled into believing that she could dance.
Yeah.
Is a form of gaslighting.
I agree. Save the Last Dance. The climax being her like mixing ballet and hip hop in one number, and it was like the worst thing you've ever
The
seen.
worst. But when we were 10, we were like, this is the best dance ever.
No, but what you're saying about like using historical documents or a play like Othello and using it in this context, or like exploring it through your eyes and through, I mean, to see history and to see all these stories. I mean, I think that is what you're doing in your book, and also like what I'm doing. I'm using this story to talk about what is happening today.
Yes, yeah.
And or like and
not-
to understand. I mean, doing it to understand our society. Or,
Yeah, exactly. Tracing things back and tracing kind of figures of speech, or like a particular rhetoric, or a kind of discourse about trans people or about race in Europe, and then not trying to see it as a way of kind of like a window into the past, but a way for the past maybe to shed light on what's happening now. Or maybe it's like a window. You're looking into the past, but the past is looking back at you, kind of. But I was just watching I watched that as well, the basketball Othello, which I'd seen as a teenager and really hated, and still really bad. Like, Josh Hartnett is also in it, and he's like pissed off that he's not allowed to be like whatever on the basketball team, and for that reason he destroys this guy's life. But I found a bunch of different ones. I watched an Ethiopian version of Othello. No, I know please, yes, be horrified, because it was just as bad as you might think. But it was really fun. It was like set in Addis, in like an ad company, and Othello was like the boss, and he had passed over Iago for a promotion, and Iago manipulated him into thinking that his girlfriend was jealous. Like, that's doing a lot for one promotion, I think, but whatever. And then it ends with Othello strangling his girlfriend, and then he's like, oh no, what have I done? But then, like, happily enough, she wakes up and is like, oh, I'm not dead. And he's like, thank God, I can't believe I nearly killed you. And they get back together again.
Oh,
it's so heartwarming.
kind of version.
But I was watching a lot of that, and kind of looked at like different decades and eras and the history of performance, and like how for a while Othello was depicted as like North African and lighter skin, but that was like post transatlantic slavery, because around that time it became very difficult to depict a kind of noble sub-Saharan African figure, like a tragic hero in that way, which is really interesting to me, like how something like that happens, and then you're like, and then as you're trying to stage it, you're like, well, no, it's never going to be realistic if we have somebody like in complete blackface, so we have to lighten it a bit and like present him as being kind of sort of North African, light skin,
not so threatening.
Like more kind of a more like a more North African more. So and then also the history of like how people have spoken, because obviously he's usually been played by white people who have attempted to kind of enact a form of racialization, so, and reading about how they approach the performances is also really interesting. The way they try to embody what kind of blackness is. There's a lot of talk about kind of moving with the stealth of an animal, and kind of flaring up randomly in bursts of temper, and that really gives you an insight into kind of about the gradual construction of blackness and kind kind of how those things have changed over time, because it's not static. It's not like everyone's always thought black people were a certain way. Like when Shakespeare wrote this play, he was most likely, at least, kind of referencing, I think, sub-Saharan Africans, and it is a character that's like a tragic character in many ways. And the emphasis, I think, in the play is not necessarily mainly on race. I know people, I mean, you can argue that it's a lot on class as well, but I would say it's mostly on religion, like, and being outside and inside, because a lot of what they kind of, the talk around Otello is that he is foreign and worships kind of a different gods, and he's always emphasizing his Christianity and how he personally kills Muslims, like, you know, the heathen whatever, like as a way of marking that he's inside of Christian society. But then in the end, when he commits suicide, because he like, if I really hope everyone's seen this, but yes, he basically kills his girlfriend. Then he discovers that he was wrong to do so, and then he's like, oh no, and kills himself, and it's very sad. But when he commits suicide, he says, he recalls how back in the day he fought against the Turk, and says, and I slew him thus, and then kills himself. And that's like a way, it's a very like obvious way of saying he's eradicating the foreign element now. He is the Turk that he once used to kill. So yeah, basically blah blah. But writing the book, I just thought it was really interesting and fun to kind of go back into performance history and think of the book as a way of putting on a different performance, like in a different genre, like poetry instead of theater, and picking up like random bits that I saw and thought were interesting and could converse with things that were happening now. So I guess that's pretty similar.
Ja, men eller hur, exakt samma sak. No, but yeah, using history or using like kind of not anything from the past, but almost as a reflection of time and society and blah blah blah.
Yeah. Because I think also, I don't know about you, but coming from some kind of marginalized identity, often you feel like you have quite like an antagonistic relationship with history in the beginning. Like when you think about it, you can get so kind of sad and upset and furious because you know history is written by the victor, you know, and you've never really won, and so you look back at history and you're like, screw you, like that's not how it happened, like this is how it happened. Or like it's heavily biased in some way. Obviously in Sweden, like Swedish schools for example, and Sweden, and like I'm thinking about the history of communism for instance, where it's like, hey kids, have I ever told you about how awful communism is? It's like, yeah, since I was a baby, right? And then you grow up like maybe with a parallel story, like my parents who for sure fled a communist regime in Ethiopia, but were communists themselves, and engaged with it in a very positive way. Like they were like, this is like liberatory politics. And so you kind of have this weird, at least for me, when you go to school and you're told this is such a bad thing, and then you have your parents who are like, oh my god, I loved the Soviet Union, it was the best time ever, look at this picture of me and the Lenin statue, and it's like, okay, like it becomes like a crash, and then you start questioning things, and then you become like antagonistic. But then at some point you're like, but at least for me it was like that if I go in antagonistically, if I go in just saying kind of fuck you history, then there's no where to go. Like there's nothing to build on. Like I have nothing to engage with, and I also erase everything that happened before.
Exactly.
Like,
And
all the people who were there.
and I mean, it doesn't get so interesting, and I think that's
Yeah.
also what you're doing very beautifully also in O, is that you're not doing that, but you're also not like I mean, because that is the other
Yeah.
way to be too nostalgic or romanticizing a past that is. So I mean, I think that you do that very beautifully to not fall in either trap,
Yeah.
but to like more have this approach of exploring and being in dialogue with and almost trying different roles or.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
But yeah, and I mean it's so much more interesting than if you, I mean, than a lot of people do it also.
Thank you.
But I know, like, I think it can be also very easy to be nostalgic, for example.
Yeah.
And I can also notice that when I'm working, because I work a lot with interviewing, often elders in the queer community, and of course there's this like it's easy to get all like giggly when you think about this party where we were yesterday, for example, in Vita Bergsparken in Stockholm, where Diana had their parties at Ceders Café. Like, so I don't know.
Do you want to say something about what that is?
Ceders Café,
Yeah.
Yeah, so okay, so yesterday I pretended I fell into this city guide role.
It was great.
Judith. And we walked to Vita Bergsparken and saw the stairs that are still that still exists from where Ceders Café used to be, which was among other things a meeting place for the first lesbian group in RFSL, Diana. So it was where they had most of their parties for a period of time. Yeah. And I don't know, I can, maybe that is not so good, but I can be a bit like, I can romanticize stuff like that a bit, but I try to not do it so much.
But I was thinking about the nostalgia for the past, obviously, is so clear in like most of the fascist movements now as well. Like, I saw this like incredibly embarrassing video of like their little like weird village, SD village, where they perform like old Swedish dances and with Mattias Karlsson and stuff, and I was
Where
like,
is that?
I have no idea. Like, I just looked at the video and laughed. But I mean, it's so interesting because it's like, again, this isn't actually the past. Like, what you're romanticizing is your idea of something that occurred. And it had a completely different function then to what it has for you, you know? Like, you're doing this as a kind of sort of screw you, multicultural Sweden kind of thing. That's not what people were thinking about in like 1802. They weren't sitting there like, oh my god, these immigrants. What? Like, and I feel like that's such a and obviously they don't think so. I really doubt they think so. But it's like not a fruitful way of engaging with the past, you know?
But very effective, I think.
Yeah, although had I seen that video, even if I had voted for SD previously, I would have been like, nah.
But I mean this nostalgia that is can be easy to fall into. Zygmunt Bauman, this sociologist, I think, he wrote this book a few years ago that was about this, how the right is using the past and how...
Oh, well, that's really interesting.
Yeah, retrotopia, it's called. So it's about like the idea of the past as something like, you know, like Skansen like going to these super cute cottages and not thinking about that people who lived there, like statarna, was like extremely poor and was so, like
Homogenic as well, no? Like everything was.
Everything was the same, and it was just exact. Everything was the same, and that I know that also. Now I forget his name, but he's a journalist. Okay, I will come up with it in a while. But how like today it's this thing that so the right wing or the racists, they are really like nostalgic or using like Swedish history as a way of saying like, oh, it was so horrible, it's so horrible now, like look back at how beautiful there was. But there's also longing among people who consider, like white Swedish people who considers themselves non-racist. There's a nostalgia, like especially back to the 50s, when everything, you know, was so simple, you know, and it's very much related to this self-image that was very strong, especially then and especially after the Second World War, when Sweden were doing great because Sweden wasn't a part of the war in that way. So there was this like there is this longing back to that like the idea of the future as like just being brighter and brighter and brighter, and that we live in a much more hopeless world now with like the like climate crisis and everything, and people also questioning this righteousness or like this idea of of Sweden as like this amazing country who are like equal and of course not racist and everything. Nothing.
No, I just want to tell you that of course we're not on the highway anymore. So now we are south of Södertälje. Time really goes fast.
Oh, wow, yeah.
When you spend it with brilliant people. So we are on the countryside now. And I think usually, is it time for tea?
Yeah.
Okay. Already.
Would you like some tea?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I was so into what you were saying, so I didn't even notice that we passed like Botkyrka, you know. So we are now actually on the edges of like Stockholm region. The most beautiful countryside in Sweden, if you ask us. Of course, it's February now, so but in these areas are a lot of organic gardenings and stuff, and we are on our way to a small restaurant. Crêperie Marie. It's in someone's house. They have this small local restaurant with organic and locally produced. And the tea we are serving today is lemon balm, ginger, and honey. So you know, so it's honey.
What's lemon balm?
Citronmeliss.
Yeah.
And lemon balm is calming. So, like for example, I have a lot of like hjärtklappning. What's that in English? The heart rises. What was it called? Yeah, after COVID. And lemon balm is also called in Swedish hjärtats fröjd. So
Is that what it is?
Yeah. So it's really good for like calming the heart.
Du vet som den där sången, Ute över hagen.
Ute över hagen. And isn't that supposed to be a herb to give yourself a abortion? Isn't that
lemon balm?
I mean this kom liljor och aghili. Or I don't know if I'm making this up or if this is like this weird knowledge.
Because I know some other herbs. But, for that.
No,
I don't know. There's just this idea.
There's like an urban legend, or like
But there
something
are
about that's no, it might be true.
So these herbs that are mentioned in the song, this old Swedish folk song, is supposed to take
It's
away a recipe to stop pregnancy.
Yeah.
Either that or eating 10 stickor, this matches, which was that was a thing they did.
Really, that worked?
I think so, but you also like 50%
really
died.
sick.
Yeah, I mean it was like a.
You poison yourself, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
I guess.
And of course we give you tea because that's also part of what we do in aghili, that we grow herbs and we have a garden out here. And I was thinking a lot about what you were saying about history and this Swedish democratic village, because these areas on the countryside are also very romanticized. The countryside is romanticized in this nationalistic way. So I always sort of find it almost activist and like an activist practice of coming here, even if I'm based here. Like,
Listen, you brought me out to nature. Like, it takes a while. And
that's activism in and of itself, to bring you out into the woods.
I feel like looking at it, I'm like, oh my god, countryside.
No, because I think also, like, for me, being an immigrant kid, it has always been, I think I've learned from the start, from the white Swedes, that I'm not supposed to be on the countryside or out in nature because we're sort of urbanized. Right?
Yeah.
So we are now on our way to Mörka. It's like one of the biggest island in southern Stockholm archipelago. So that's where they have their restaurant.
I really feel like safari is like right now. Like, where are the
safari,
animals? Where are the giraffes?
They're coming.
Did you see this? It was I don't remember who was behind it. Some anti-fascist movement did this överklass safari a few years.
Yeah.
I wasn't a part of it, but I saw the documentation, and I mean,
But wasn't it on also Rätt buss?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe.
the
I
bus,
don't know.
yeah, because this is a newer bus, but it's. I think it was Rätt bus. You need to ask the driver.
But it was
I think so. Because this bus has also experienced a lot of activism.
Yes, and parties.
Yeah, and parties.
You can kind of tell.
But that was such a good idea, överklass safari.
It was so good.
I mean,
I'm a fabulous guide as an overclass safari.
Really?
And look to your right, you can see that people who do not pay tax, pay tax. Yes. Yes.
But I mean, it was so. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious how provoking that was for, like. I mean, I just remember this scene of these kids standing with their iPhones, like, showing, like, I have an iPhone, like, I mean, trying to show how powerful they were with their, like, they were rich, they had like iPhones, like mocking the people on the bus, like, you don't have a job, like I have a I mean,
so
like
weird.
14-year-olds.
Okay, that's pretty weird because that's, I mean, that's just a part of the safari then.
Yeah, I mean, they became a part of it, but I don't know, they were so just really angry, I guess.
Yeah.
Not expecting that. I mean, also.
Also, like being seen,
Oh.
like in a way that you can control, I think is very weird for them.
Judith, when you were talking about Othello and your, especially the part where he kind of denounces the heathens, I guess.
Yeah.
I thought about Sara Matakamele, who was like the first like black Swedish woman, or like the first black woman to live in Kalmar at least in like 1860s something. And there's this conversation with her and Cecilia somebody who's a white woman who started a school for women at the time or something, where I guess Sara would have arrived here. She arrived here pregnant, not really Christian, but then in this conversation between her and Cecilia, you can kind of like read her being between two like cosmologies, for example, and like, but at the same time constantly denouncing being a heathen and like saying, but I am Christian, like, but now I'm Christian, and then she like will recite like Psalms 10 or whatever. And I've been writing about her, or like about her a little bit in a poetic way, whatever, for like a thing I'm writing. And it's also like, I think the whole not wanting to romanticize history and people in history, I think for me, what I like in the writing process and like catching myself doing that, it's a lot about also just wanting to humanize them, maybe, and like also wanting to like, even though history maybe doesn't like say this, but also just imagine them as people with agency in little ways. But yeah, I thought of that when you were kind of speaking about history and people.
Can I just, you mean like making them human by not romanticizing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but like,
exactly.
like making like just somehow, at least within yourself, acknowledging their nuancedness as people, even though history doesn't want to, and even though like the documentation, which wants to purport itself as factual, doesn't either. And I guess it maybe also goes back to, no, maybe not the same thing, but like Zong, that I forget her name now. Yeah, who wrote?
Oh, sorry.
It's a poet called Norbese Phillips who wrote a book called Zong. Yeah.
Yeah, and she like uses these 2 pages in like I think it was like a court ruling. Oh my god, it's a longer story, but in terms of how she uses the material to like draw out these voices that are unimportant by the standards of the document, unimportant, and not even voices to begin with.
Yeah. Zong was a slave ship that was destroyed for insurance purposes, basically, killing all the slaves on board. And this was done in order to get money from the insurance company. And so the court papers have to do with insurance fraud rather than with the murders of all these people. And so Norbese Phillips has gone into those archives and found those papers, and like from them trying to find a voice for the people who were murdered. And like the difficulty of trying to find that, like find a voice for someone who at the time was considered an object. It's really a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just 2 pages. I don't even know how many words, but she like draws out. Yeah. I was just thinking.
Yeah,
It's
no,
really-
give
yeah,
it.
it's
Yeah,
really interesting.
I haven't read it. It sounds super interesting.
It's very good. But also what you were saying about like not trying to collapse someone into like a symbol, but trying to kind of give them some space, even if you've never known them, but acknowledging that they were a person in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, person with an everyday.
I wanted to mention I really appreciate your talks today because I think I have also been working with about this seeing the past as a way to reflect on the present, also with a beautiful poem that you were talking about. So we have an organization, colonial, and it has we have a logo that is inspired by this deity called Chuquichinchay. That was an indigenous deity in the Andes of Peru, and this deity was like an represented the duality of genders, because also questioning this idea that progress comes from the north, and you know that we're not so long time ago I heard a person saying that feminism is new in South America and things like that. So all the time I try to reflect on this, and right now I'm doing a project where I'm trying to using these pre-Hispanic sonic devices. I'm trying to take them to reflect on the past, actually, to see the today, what's going on now. And there is this indigenous aphorism, Aymara aphorism, that says that the present is in front of us because that's the only thing we know, and the past is in our backs like a burden. The future is in our backs like a burden, like this fabrics where you carry it, you know, in the Andes you carry it in the back. So I really think that makes sense because this is Aymara, for instance, how you see reality. And the past becomes present when it's, how do you say, it becomes important in the present. So I think that's an important way in how to see also this linear idea that progress is something that is given to us new, when it's something actually all these rights and all this presence that we have are something that we need to fight for all the time. To not be, because I mean in my country also, I'm from Peru, and we have been educated to feel like the invaders gave us education, technology, and the real gods and everything. So, and that's taught in all the schools. So I mean, this is questions that you need to find for your own, and also that comes also with self-esteem. Also, if you are a person with indigenous background, you know, all of this has to do with your present and how you are. You must fight for your right to take place in the now. So I really appreciate what you were saying today. Thank you.
It's very interesting.
Thank you. And also the element of you having to be thankful, like that you're being given this, from when you should be raging, like.
Do you want to go out from the bus and take some fresh air?
Yeah, sure.
Because we are go out in the mud. Because
I am in nature.
I know, but
I was like, no. Never. I'm in nature.
it was so interesting about hearing about your work as well. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Really nice stuff.
Yeah.
From so many aspects.
You wanna?
Are you translating Zong? Are you on it now, or?
Not yet.
That's amazing. That's like a lot. That is a heavy book.
Yeah, it's probably gonna be very difficult to translate.
It's gonna be difficult, but you're great.
You're
can
gonna
Are
do
you
it.
doing a translation?
Of
of
Zong,
that?
yeah.
Alone. It's with Erasure and
So good.
who I think has written a lot about.
Yeah.
He was also in this conversation with Norisi. And I think Gipka or something.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Gipka, yeah. She did really interesting, like two things. Like one where they, on the anniversary of the Zong, the ships, or when the enslaved were murdered, like a reading from like across the world on Instagram. So they would be like, you know, live reading of it. And then her, speaking of also like, the work was translated in Italy without her permission.
Yes.
What an ordeal.
It was so like, it was just
was
and then
awful.
and then
so
she did it.
disrespectful.
It was so disrespectful.
It's also hard to choose which part was most
Yeah.
disrespectful. It's like
But it goes like a little bit like they could take like black intellectual labor and just thought like, oh, she should be grateful that we're translating
exactly,
it. Like she birthed this, like it's her labor and
they accused her of being colonial and racist. And it was like, it was such a bizarre thing.
I was like, not me.
I mean, imagine stealing a black woman's work and then being like, maybe you're the one who is being
that is girl boss
colonist.
gaslight gatekeep on a whole other level.
Have you brought something with you that you would like to share with us, like a poem or? Is this a good moment, or do you want to do it on the bus?
Yeah, and the bus in the heat.
Take this one.
Men hur känner du? Vill
Det är mest för att den är så.
Ska vi låta det
Thank you for Okay, but then let's go back to the bus. Oh, thank you.
we're bringing it to the... Vad sa du?
Käka och käsa. Mellan tuggarna. Så,
Ja, gud, det är som att jag blev så... jag kan liksom bara koncentrera mig på en sak. Så jag känner att jag bara, gud, vad har jag sagt? Det blev så lite...
Det är inspelat, så...
Usch, ångesten.
Men
Nej, det är ju
eller så kan jag kolla dig så kan du kolla åt mig.
Och så kan du bara judge mig efteråt.
Så kan det vara så 8-10 prestation. Och fan.
Men är det någonting mer som...
Här.
Nej, men jag bara funderar på om vi ska prata om något mer. Om det är något ämne du vill avhandla. Som vi liksom... Absolut, något skvaller om samer.
Som jag vill avhandla nu.
Ja.
Judith kan allt om det. Jag tror att det är bästa skvallret på första hand.
Okej.
Har du någonting?
Jag tyckte det var så spännande med ditt nya projekt. Men det kanske känns det är så konstigt att prata om det.
Det blir lite ur... Ja, precis. Det blir lite
Men maybe talk the question that we got talking about utopias and or creating spaces for and how if we can do that through our... Do you want to say something about that maybe?
Do you want to start? Maybe.
I can start and then your questions about like where to find breathing spaces, not breathing spaces, breathing spaces in like a neoliberal world where you are even as an artist and a poet like forced or pushed to be your own varumärke, brand with the pressure of relating to economy and like your own worth, but like how can you still try to create these spaces where you don't have to deal with that, or where and I don't know, like for me it has to do with being in spaces where the money plays a small a very small part maybe, or not at all, and I think that when I think my work works it is like together with the community, and when I don't, also when I can be present, and we were like saying several times yesterday, like to be oneself, att vara sig själv. It sounds really cheesy when you say it in Swedish, and at least, but for me it's about or I was thinking about it when I was on my way here, and I was thinking about it in the terms of like when I feel that I can be present, like as close to myself as possible, then that is some kind of space. And I was also thinking about, like, I had this, as I said, I interview a lot of people. That's a big part of my work, and work together with people. And I had this, I did an interview with an activist, and I don't know, it was like suddenly in our interview, it was like this moment of just like, when we met, it felt like we met, or we connected in this really beautiful way, and we both like started to giggle a bit, because it was like obvious that like something was happening in the room, like not like a romantic thing at all, but it was more like of a friendship, or like a connection. So I think about that, to try to create those spaces where you can meet.
Yeah.
It sounds very simple, but it's something with this to meet each other and to be as close to yourself, if I make sense when I say that, as possible. And yeah.
I like that. Yeah. And I think it is difficult too. I think it's actually very difficult to create those moments and spaces of like real connection, right? Because sort of the social structure kind of not just encourages, but basically forces us to be individuals, you know, and completely separate from each other and atomized. I was thinking about like how like this is the thing I hate so much. But you know when you're like at the pharmacy or the airport or some random shop and they have those little smileys, it's like, how have you appreciated our assistance today?
Oh, it's so horrible.
Angry smiley, medium smiley, happy. Like it's so evil. Also because it's like it really puts like you as a worker interacting with another worker places you, basically aligns you with the boss, right? You're doing their work, like you are sitting there being a snitch.
What kind of people presses those buttons? They're so
But that's like for me just such a clear, like me purchasing my lip balm or whatever and the person selling it to me, we're on the same team. And this stupid thing is so obviously there to change that, to put me above the person who is assisting me, right? And then me being like, oh, watch out, because if you don't suck up to me, I might press the angry man, and then you have to get evaluated. Like, it's so evil. But I feel like it's such like a symbol of how things work now. Like, speaking of like being present, I feel like mentally we're also encouraged to have the same thing in our heads all the time about ourselves. Like that's why it's so difficult to be present. Like at work, it's like, did I do enough? Like in a social interaction, was I funny enough? Like was I cute enough? Like also the way social media really like embodies that. Like I'm not Black Mirror. Like I'm not like, boo, I hate social media. It's so evil, but it is like the same, you know, how many likes do you get, or how much does the word spread, you know, it's quantifiable suddenly, how much people like you or your content or what you're saying. And so I feel like that's so, if you've got that thing in your head all the time being like, but how intelligent is this, how charming, or how much would this be worth, like with a poetry collection or a piece of art or something, then it's impossible to be present because you're evaluating yourself all the time. You have a boss in your head who is like ready to fire you at any point. So yeah, no, I think that's really true. But those moments of like when you're just a person with another person and you share something, and that moment is like puts you outside of, maybe that's like a kind of utopian moment, puts you outside of the market of that kind of thing. I was also thinking about what you said earlier about nostalgia and like how weird it is that everyone agree, like society really kind of pushes the idea that everything's getting better and better and better. But at the same time, there's a massive rush for nostalgia. Like politically, nostalgia is stronger than ever before. So how can you, on the one hand, say everything's getting better and better, history is progress, and on the other hand, explain that everyone wants to get back to the 50s, which, I mean...
Yeah, but maybe they're just longing for that, the sense of this framtidsanda, this framtidstron that was actually happening much more then.
Yeah, I think
so maybe they're just longing for that.
Yeah, I think that's true.
And an idea of a simpler society when when society wasn't so complex and hard to relate to. When you could be a villain, like when you have an idea.
But also, that it's like, the idea of history as progress like really just doesn't work now, because it's so clear to me that people think that we've stagnated. That things aren't changing, things are not getting better. I think the idea of a future is completely kind of foreclosed. Like I think people feel like the only thing that's ahead is kind of complete disaster. Obviously with climate change, even people who deny that there's climate change, I think are very concerned. Like I think it affects people regardless. But not just that, I think also the kind of I think that this is like the end result of neoliberal politics, because they keep being like, this is the final stage of evolution. This is what everything strove for. This is human nature at its peak. And if you keep going on about that, then what are people going to see ahead of them? Like a different iPhone? Like what? Like, if you look at Star Trek in the 60s.
Let's look at Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, that was supposed to be utopian. It was like, imagine a future where everyone is kind of like on board this ship and
they have
working
no
together.
money.
Yeah, and they have no money. They just travel to different, obviously traveling to different planets. I mean, there's something slightly colonial about the Federation, maybe.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit.
Maybe a little bit.
But also, I mean, I think it's also, as
But
you're
what-
saying, there are a lot of interesting.
The dream about the future in that, I mean, obviously it comes from a very particular American perspective, but the dream about the future is still kind of like some kind of like traveling UN with like a charming captain, and everyone on the team is like equal and stuff. And obviously there was this big deal. They had the first kind of interracial kiss on television and stuff. But if you look at like sci-fi TV now, like it's all like, well, in the future everything's gonna be awful. Like it sucks. Like not, I mean, the shows are good, but like The Expanse, for instance, like they're all about kind of class disparity and people eating themselves.
But I mean, they're also like Octavia E. Butler, which I know that
Yeah, but she's
Woo!
dead now.
She's dead now. Yeah, but I think that I mean she's a good example of someone who's also presenting an alternative.
Oh yeah, for
I mean,
sure.
she's presenting a dystopic future, but she's also presenting alternative ways of like creating community.
Yeah, I love her.
Ja, alltså det är ju bara. Are we getting?
Vi är framme.
Yes.
Thank you for mentioning Octavia.
Yeah.
I'm very happy.
Ja.
Vad jag ska säga? Just det, Kindred, tidens länkar finns det på svenska nu.
Ja.
Det är några som vill åka ut här, så att jag kör fram, släpper förbi dem.
Okej, så stannar vi på bussen. Okej. Vi stannar på bussen då.
Okej.
Okej.
Skulle inte göras en...
We need to let someone out.
Ska du göra så?
I heard rumors that they were going to make like maybe a film or a TV series of one of her books. Kindred, or maybe Parable of Soul, or maybe something else. It hasn't done it right.
Yeah, it is pretty weird. Because she would be really popular today. But that's what I'm saying about like sci-fi as a genre is like very complex and myriad and stuff. But looking at like popular sci-fi TV shows, I think also says something about like ideas about the future.
Okay.
Yeah. Sen är jag typ lika dålig på lika dålig på science som jag är på historia. Det är skillnaden att jag faktiskt gillar historia och inte science.
Kolla hur Samuel ser ut som en godsherre när han står där.
Han är ändå...
Left you all alone.
Han ser ut som att han är redo att gå ut och skjuta en hare typ.
Do you wanna share the poems or text
Ja, just
or
det.
something that you brought?
Vill du börja eller ska jag börja?
Never mind.
So we can just walk in here. So this is our studio, not the whole building, of course, but so talking about religion, this is the old church school.
Okay.
So on the other side of the bus, you can see the church. Erasure. It's pretty old church, actually. So this was the old church school. Now it's like a culture center. They call it Kulturcentrum. Erasure skola, with artist studios and a cafe. So let's go because they can be. I think there will be cars coming this way. But are you up for, before we stop it, usually we stop the live stream when we arrive to the studio.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to do it outside, I don't know,
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
outdoors? Because it's not that cold now, is it? Are you okay? Everyone?
Not only that, I have a
Oh,
jumper
but
jacket.
this is already super hot. Careful.
Maybe we should do it before the entrance because it could be a little bit traffic for people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's also an opening of an
Yeah.
exhibition
Yeah.
in the house, in this building today. So let's stay here, no?
Yeah.
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 Maybe I should start because I got so, a bit nervous of doing reading a poem together with a poet. So if I do it first, I will get less anxiety than if this pro beside me
This
will do
is-
it.
Maybe it's okay if you want to. Sam. We would like to hear it.
Yes, me too.
Okay, I will read it. Okay. So it's a poem by British poet Kate Tempest. Okay. But when time pulls lives apart, hold your own. When everything is fluid, nothing can be known with any certainty, hold your own. Hold it till you feel it there, as dark and dense and wet as earth, as vast and bright and sweet as air. When all there is knowing that you feel what you're feeling, hold your own. Ask your hands to know the things they hold. I know the days are reeling past in such squealing blasts, but stop for breath and you will know it's yours. Swaying like an open door when storms are coming, hold. Time is an onslaught, love is a mission. We work for vocations until in remission. We wish we'd had patience and given more time to our children. Feel each decision that you make. Make it, hold your own, hold your lovers, hold their hands, hold their breasts in your hands like your hands were their bra, hold their face in your palms like a prayer, hold them all night, feel them hold back, don't hold back, hold your own. Every pain, every grievance, every stab of shame, every day spent with a demon in your brain giving chase, hold it. Know the wolves that hunt you. In time, they will be the dogs that bring your slippers. Love them right, and you will feel them kiss you when they come to bite. Hot snouts digging out your cuddles with their bloody muscles, hold. Nothing you can buy will ever make you more whole. This whole thing thrives on us feeling always incomplete. And it is why we search for happiness in whatever thing it is we crave in the moment. And it is why we can never really find it there. It is why you will sit there with the lover that you fought for in the car you sweated years to buy, wearing the ring you dreamed of all your life. And some part of you will still be unsure that this is what you really want. Stop craving, hold your own. But if you're satisfied with where you're at, with who you are, you won't need to buy new makeup or new outfits or new pots and pans, to cook new exciting recipes for new exciting people, to make yourself feel like the new exciting person you think you're supposed to be. Happiness, the brand, is not happiness. We are smarter than they think we are. They take us all for idiots, but that's their problem. When we behave like idiots, it becomes our problem. So hold your own. Breathe deep on a freezing beach. Taste the salt of friendship. Notice the movement of a stranger. Hold your own. and let it be catching.
Thank you so much.
So beautiful.
Woo! Så. Vad sa du?
Funkar det med ljudet?
Ja, ja, visst är det fint?
I blåsten.
Mm-hmm.
Shall
I? Okay, so this is from Frans Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth. Because, yeah, we were talking about the future and utopias and how we construct them together. Come then, comrades. The European game is finally ended. We must find something different. We today can do everything so long as we do not imitate Europe, so long as we are not obsessed by the desire to catch up with Europe. Europe now lives at such a mad, reckless pace that she has shaken off all guidance and all reason, and she is running headlong into the abyss. We would do well to avoid it with all possible speed. When I search for man in the technique and the style of Europe, I see only a succession of negations of man and an avalanche of murders. Let us decide not to imitate Europe. Let us combine our muscles and our brains in a new direction. Let us try to create the whole man whom Europe has been incapable of bringing to triumphant birth.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Woohoo! Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Poor
both
woman.
of you.
Säga menande till dig. Jag vet hur det
Specifically to
I know you.
Okay, everyone, let's go inside.
Ja.
And we will soon say goodbye to the live stream. Thank you everyone for joining. You get a lot of love and thanks here on the live stream.
Your fans. Or Judith, who knows? It might actually, after referencing TikTok, new fan base.
So, and welcome to our studio. On the very edge of Stockholm. Gick jag in före dig här, Nemo?
Hur känns det?
No, keep your shoes on.
Yes.
Okay.
It's pretty,
Huh?
yeah, but it's okay. I'm just gonna go inside. Okay. So the table is set. Let's pretend we're all sharing the meal, even with the ones on live stream. Hope you can join us. This space makes time. So bye bye, everyone.
What a beautiful